Thank you for joining our Stellar Cyber webinar today. My name is Kelly Berg, Senior Marketing Manager at Ingram Micro. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes. In terms of general housekeeping, your lines have been muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to type your question in the Q&A box on your screen. Questions will be addressed at the conclusion of the webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and now I'll hand things over to Brian Stoner from Stellar Cyber.
Thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon to everyone on the line today. We really appreciate you making the time, and we're very excited, to have this conversation with one of our very strategic partners, Ingram Micro. Today, we've got three of us. Unfortunately, David Vance was not able to attend the call today, but we do have Brian Rawls from Ingram Micro, myself, Brian Stoner. I'm the Vice President of the Service Provider Group here at Stellar Cyber. And also with us is Scott Bianco. He's a Senior Systems Engineer for Stellar Cyber, and he's going to be participating in the panel and also doing a demo for us today. So thank you all for making the time to participate. We're going to talk about three different things, today. The first is I'm going to do a short overview of the challenge of ransomware today and some of the things that you should be aware of. And then we'll have a panel discussion about how we can solve some of these challenges. And then finally, Scott will provide a demonstration of how Stellar Cyber can not only, detect ransomware, but help you remediate it even automatically. So some great content, and we hope to have some great participation in the panel discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with our discussion on ransomware. I think it's really interesting. In my background, I was actually with McAfee, close to 16 years ago. And we were seeing malware for the first time back then. And I know everyone hears about ransomware in the news, but what's interesting is that ransomware is getting more and more sophisticated. The attackers, because of their success in leveraging ransomware, are now very well funded and operate in a way that they are as organized as any, business. So I think the key thing that we need to realize now is that these are not people that are doing things on a part-time basis. These are full-time ransomware as a service syndicates that are doing this. And even today, every day we see things in the headlines that point to ransomware. But I think what's interesting for service providers and partners is that, this is no longer, something that we can ignore. And it's also not coming from the traditional areas that we might think that it's coming from. And Scott's going to show this to you in the demo, but for instance, I think a lot of us think, well, that just comes, from bad email hygiene and, uneducated users who are clicking on things that they shouldn't click on. But that's very far from the case today. As a matter of fact, KP Snacks in Europe was hit by a ransomware attack, and it disrupted their supply chain for a period of time. So now it's not even only about the ransom, but also disrupting business. And this ALPHV group actually interviewed with this, particular source and discussed their plans for extending their ransomware as a service offerings to their customers. And, it is something that is very dangerous. And he talks at length about how successful they are and how they differentiate themselves from other ransomware as a service providers. And finally, We've also seen some recent attacks. This one was really picked up by Walmart, where a number of their customers have been getting ransomware, on their devices by connecting to Walmart and having, files encrypted, but the attackers are only asking for a small amount of money. So we're starting to see these ransomware attacks evolve and change tactics, and it's getting harder and harder to find and stop these things. Part of the reason that we have such a challenge with ransomware is not just because our endpoint security isn't picking it up, right? Endpoint detection and protection is one vector of the puzzle, right? Having a SIM or a logging capability with user behavior is another core tenet of good security. But then also having good network detection and response. But the problem is today, those technologies exist in a silo. And because the data comes into these different sources in that silo, in that particular format, it really leaves blind spots for the hackers to exploit. And what is important about that when you think about ransomware is, if you have an attacker in a network, and you see this in pretty much every security report, they could be there for over 200 days, adding additional endpoints to their inventory, additional backdoors that they can use before they instrument the actual attack. And in a lot of cases, that ransomware is delivered by a remote hacker and not through email. So we really need to think about how we're trying to fix this problem completely, because we need the ability to be able to understand what's happening between these different silos and have a more integrated approach. At Stellar Cyber, we were the pioneers of building a next generation SOC technology. And what I mean by that is, if you're familiar with SIM technology, you ingest a lot of the data, it gets into your SIM platform, and then you write rules to detect behavior based on things that you know are bad, right? Similar to, maybe ransomware. The problem is that those technologies are providing the logs in different formats, and unless you write the rule set and follow, really good security hygiene, it's going to be almost impossible to find those attackers that are low and slow dwelling in a network. So Stellar Cyber really pioneered leveraging machine learning to do this, to solve that challenge. And machine learning can do a lot to provide a superior level of detection over what we would like to call more of a managed detection and response service. And we know that a lot of partners have purchased, managed detection and response services where you're just basically reselling somebody else's SOC and services, which was great when these attacks weren't as sophisticated as they are today. And the other challenge is a lot of those services are kind of black box. You don't really get access to a portal. You can't do your own threat hunting. And typically what they do is just provide you with a list of alerts in no certain severity, type order. At Stellar Cyber, what we've done is we've built a completely open platform. So it can ingest logs from any data source, similar to a SIM. But what's very different about Stellar Cyber is that as we're ingesting the data, we normalize it into a standard form factor. And that's really important because when we're doing that, we can actually compare it against a dozen different sources of threat intelligence. We can run it in a sandbox if it doesn't have a reputation. And before we store these records, we've already done kind of that level 1 analyst job that your MDR service has done, but we take it a step further. We actually prioritize all of those alerts by their severity. And within the platform, you can take a remediative action without having to VPN into your customer's network and then go and set a block rule on a firewall. With our bidirectional integrations, you can click on a button and send that request out to the firewall from one platform. So what we're really talking about here for a managed services provider, if you haven't built a SOC yet, but your customers are more and more concerned about the basic level of MDR services you might be reselling them today, and you're thinking about evolving your program to provide SOC services, this is a great platform to do that because it requires a lot less manpower and maintenance to do all of these things. So at a high level, we've talked about how ransomware is a challenge, that it's continuing to evolve, and that it may not come from the traditional, threat vectors. I think now would be a great time to open up this, panel discussion with Brian and Scott and see, what are you seeing in the field and what are some of the questions we can answer for you about the challenges that you're having with ransomware? Brian, did you want to jump on and chime in?
Yeah, sure. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah, so I mean, you hit some of the points to start with. I mean, a lot of the current trends that we're really seeing is the evolution of ransomware. I mean, everybody started at, oh yeah, it's encrypting, they're getting a ransom, they want Bitcoin. That is what still the understanding with a lot of people that are out there. They don't understand. They're using new techniques. They're evading what we're doing. They're finding new ways to get around defenses that are out there right now. There's extortion tactics right now that are single, double, triple, quadruple extortions, and I can kind of explain that a little bit as well. So if you look at like the original encryption method, it's literally encrypting your files, asking for the demand for Bitcoin usually. If they don't pay up, then we're going to delete those, or you're never going to get the key back, and time and money's lost. Where we try to go, and they're evolving this now. So it's because they want you to pay. They're not only just encrypting those, they're going to exfiltrate those. Is like this double extortion attack. So if you don't pay, then hey, fine, but we're going to publish everything that we just extorted in the public. So all your records and files and folders are now viewable to everybody. So there's that piece, and then they'll couple that with another piece that might be like a distributed denial of service attack, just to make sure we're bringing you to a crawl to a halt, so you can't do anything. And then on top of that, they're not just going after you. They're going to try to extend that to your customers, your supply chains, things along those as well. So there's really a lot that they're trying to do, and some of the different methods and things that they're really trying to still do. I mean, all the tactics, and Brian, you said it as well. It's not just email and phishing anymore, even though that is still a primary vector. They are doing brute force attacks. They're trying to steal our passwords and our credentials and get into our RDP sessions for remote access, things like that. They're still using websites like a drive-by download, where you click on something on a website, it might redirect you if you're not aware of viewing what's on the actual URL at all times. You could be subject to that. And surprising enough, they're still doing just USB drives. I saw a news article just the other day. People are just being mailed USB drives, and people are plugging them in. And that's how they're doing those smaller attacks that Brian mentioned as well, is they're going after personal people now. So it's not, hey, I'm an enterprise, I'm being targeted, oh, I'm SMB. And these are the conversations I still have. Hey, I'm too small to be targeted. Well, they're going all the way down to the individual person now and targeting those people. And that's really where this is evolving, is it's everybody now. And that's the scary part. There's nothing that really is out of the means of them trying to get into a business, into your own personal assets, into your own personal email, and then spreading laterally to get any amount of ransom they can kind of gain.
No, I think those are some great points, Brian. And, from an education perspective, I think a lot of us have sold education packages to our customers, right? And we're still having those things, and they're helping, right? On the email side of things, people aren't clicking on things as bad, right? But when an attacker brute forces their way into a network, great example of that was SolarWinds, right? This was a pretty clever approach that the attackers took, where they actually compromised the developer at SolarWinds to put their code into the next update that was being pushed out to all of their customers. And as soon as you updated that server, it would go out and begin to pull down the different packages that the attackers were going to use to leverage in that environment. I'm sorry, did you have something to add to that, Brian?
No, I just thought that was honestly, that was kind of genius, because they did all the work for them. That was really smart technique they used. And this is what we're kind of talking about, is these are some new techniques they're trying, and that was super effective.
Yeah, and another thing that happens in those types of attacks that's really hard to detect unless you have the right technology deployed is once that server was updated, then it started scanning the internal network, right? Which it's never done before. And so, before the SolarWinds attack, nobody had a rule for that in their SIM, right? But at Stellar Cyber, we have machine learning that knew that machine had never scanned the network before. So as soon as that happened, we triggered an alert that it was an anomalous scanning of the network from an internal asset. And so our partners were all protected from this before SolarWinds even took it public. And the same thing happened when Kaseya got breached. And I think the important thing for all the partners on the line here today to understand is that the attackers know that if they can compromise your RMM tool, it's basically a treasure map to all of your customers' critical assets. And if you can't stop it, or at least detect it as they're doing their reconnaissance, you could be potentially exposing your customers to ransomware that doesn't even come from a phishing attack, because that's exactly what they started doing once they scanned the network and got a foothold on other machines. But even more importantly, ransomware can also be used similar to the way that they've been using DDoS to keep the security teams busy, because they may be dumping a SQL database to a file and exfiltrating that through a reverse tunnel while they're dropping the ransomware, so that the entire security team is focused on the ransomware while they're exfiltrating their ultimate goal. So I hope we can kind of educate the audience today as to some of these new advanced tactics, so they can start to understand how they can build a service to protect their customers from it.
Yeah, valid points. I want to jump in a little too here. Is when it's probably before COVID, I'm part of the infraguard for the FBI, and we had chapter meetings, and we had some guest speakers, and they said the number one thing to put in your environment if you're aware of ransomware, and then they do a lot of different remediations, was just to add multi-factor authentication. But if you saw the news, I think it was like a month ago, Verizon was breached. And what they did was took the ability from Verizon to now clone your phone. So now they can avoid the multi-factor by getting the factor authentication to a clone device with your phone number on it. So now they have your password. If they found that, they're going to try to hack your system to gain access multi-factor, and it's going to send it to your device, which is how we prevent that. But now if they can clone your phone and get that code sent to that other clone device, then multi-factor is out the window as well on those devices. Just keeps evolving. They keep finding a way around all these preventative measures.
Well, and again, I think that really speaks volumes to kind of the traditional approach to using rules to detect these things. The attackers don't have any rules, right? They'll do whatever they can, clever ways to get in and deploy that ransomware, right? But I think it really points to the fact that we, as partners, need to start using more advanced security technologies to protect our customers from these things. And things like unsupervised machine learning can baseline what's the normal behavior of your device. When do you normally log in? Where do you log in from? What time of day? Things that you would think are just so simple to create rules for is really complex in a SIM. But when you use machine learning, it's extremely simple. And the machine learning can baseline what's normal, and it learns over time, so it kind of continues to evolve. And we've actually developed a really comprehensive jumpstart program for our partners to help them learn this technology, implement it quickly, and support it ongoing, and really help your customers protect themselves from these advanced tactics and techniques that we're seeing today. Scott, do you have anything to add?
Sure, you touched on many of the different tactics that are used, and it's important to focus on the overlying principles behind them, right? It's not just this method, that method, this approach, that approach. It's a moving target, right? Because we have stolen and captured credentials, you have credential stuffing, you have brute force success, you have zero-day attacks, you have then, once they're in, maybe they got in under the radar, you have command and control communication that you'll see. You have lateral movement, system enumeration, GPO access, registry modification, Mimikatz access. And then right before the final stages of the attack, you have the deleting of the shadow copy or disabling recovery of some sort. So you have all these little pieces that can fly under the radar, but when you put them all together to a comprehensive picture, that's when you see what's really going on, and you want to see that picture before it's complete. You don't want the picture to be, the final touches of that picture to be there before you see it. Otherwise, you're doing forensic analysis at that point. So that's what Stellar does. It paints that picture so that you can identify it before it's done, and you can stop it before it's done.
Great point, Scott. No, valid, very valid.
So maybe we should roll into the demo then, Scott, and then we'll have some time at the end for maybe a couple of questions.
Sure.
Great.
So welcome, everyone. What you've been viewing on the screen is our platform. This is Stellar Cyber Security Operation Platform. It is driven by AI, driven by machine learning. Everything you see on this dashboard, this is the main landing page, the default landing page. Everything you see here is driven by machine learning. Dead center, you see the Stellar Cyber invention of the open XDR kill chain. It is the stages of the attack from left to right, the least severe to the most severe. And what this is we've taken 5 steps, 5 stages of an attack, and overlaid it to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So the initial attempts, if I mouse over, you'll see the tactics that roll into this stage of an attack: reconnaissance, external credential access, external XDR, user behavioral access, and then the persistent foothold. And you'll see the tactics, exploration and propagation. And we find that exploration and propagation, they're very closely related, and they feed each other, often in cycles prior to the final stage of exfiltration and impact. So we've grouped these together to make it more human readable, to make it more understandable. And when we use that same analogy of painting a picture, we want to stop it before we get to this exfiltration and impact stage, before data is leaving your environment, before ransomware is encrypting files. We want to stop it here. We want to stop it well before here. But this helps us group everything together. Down below, you'll see the individual tactics with the security alerts that roll into that tactic highlighted for you by count. So you can quickly see where you need to give attention to. So for example, under exfiltration, we can quickly go right there and you'll see. So if we look at all the alerts in the platform, we have 174 alerts out of the box. You don't have to write any rules. You don't have to do anything. Out of the box, we have 174 machine learning driven detections. Out of those, 66 have triggered. But if we go and we just look at exfiltration, for example, it'll take us to that category, or that tactic. We have 14 security alerts that roll into, security alert types that roll into exfiltration and impact under exfiltration. And out of those, we can see, oh, we have outbound to Tor node, 12 critical. Well, let's take a look. We see a timeline, we see a country, we see how many of these are critical, and then we can drill right into the alert itself. And we can see key fields being pulled out, extracted for us, given to us. These are specific to this particular alert, outbound to Tor node. These key fields are unique to this particular alert. We see machine learning statistics up above. We see all the key fields here, why it's important to us. And then we can look in all the details of this alert forensically. See everything that's going on in a human readable table and its native JSON format. Once we've understood what this is all about, how serious this is, we can also go and read up on it as far as going to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We can go right to the exfiltration, go right to the web page. We can get a link to this, or we can take an external action. Because if data is leaving the environment, is there any legitimate reason why any internal source would be communicating to a Tor node that has a reputation of being a Tor node? Probably not. So you'd want to block this on the firewall, or you'd want to disable this user, or you would want to contain or quarantine this asset. Stop this from taking place. This is just one example of just one security alert. Let's take a look at one other, impact, for example. We look at impact here, Office 365, multiple users deleted. What is that all about? Let's take a look. So we can see where this happened, how critical it is. There's one of these for the time frame we're looking at. And we can quickly see the user ID, where they were sourced from. We can see all the details involved with this. And again, we can take actions. Up above, we get a human readable description with the entity included in this dynamic human readable description. We can read up on this in the knowledge base. There's all sorts of information available to us regarding this alert, and there are no rules written for it. This came from machine learning to help us understand where my problems are in the environment. So how does this relate to ransomware? Well, let's go back, and it's really great to have all these security alerts, really wonderful. But that doesn't give us the picture, does it? It gives us one little tiny piece of the picture. It's very hard to tell what a picture is if you're zoomed all the way in and looking at one tiny piece. Where the real power lies in our platform is the ability to group these together to a thread. We want to see a thread of activity. Well, how can we do that? Well, it takes an analyst days, sometimes weeks, to do that. To say, well, what's really related to this activity and that activity and this entity and that entity? But we have the power of machine learning. We have GraphML that runs on top, another layer on top of what we were just looking at. And that will group this activity together, related activity, into what we call incidents. So on the left-hand side, you see a list of incidents, and for the sake of our discussion today, we're going to look at one that's surrounding dark side. And this is a dark side ransomware incident. So these numbers here represent individual security alerts. And here are the individual security alerts. And if you looked at these individually, and if we sort it by time, you look at these individually, oh, there was a phishing URL with an alert score of 43. Well, that might fly under the radar, wouldn't it? Then there's an initial Trojan being moved from one system to another. And then we have RDP information, that could be a false positive. PowerShell, then we have a Mimikatz, then we have SQL dump, and then we have volume shadow deletion. Well, individually, these things might be taken in isolation, and if we don't relate them together, if we don't see the whole picture, we don't realize there's an ongoing attack. But if we look at it holistically, we're able to group these together, as we just did, and we're able to see the timeline of what happened first, the phishing URL, the Trojan, the RDP port opening. And how do we do that? Well, these observables are entities and behaviors. And we find a relation. Machine learning can find a relation between them to say, hey, wait a minute, this entity and this behavior is kind of related to that entity and that behavior, which is kind of related to that entity and that behavior. And we group them together into one object, one unit, one single thing. And we can treat it as one single thing, and we can assign it to someone, and we can change its priority, and we can give it a tag, and we can give it a description, and we can read the summary of it as one single unit. We can add other security alerts to it. We can take some away from this, but we can treat it as a holistic object with all these entities and all these pieces and parts that we didn't have to do anything to create. Machine learning created it for us, and it grouped all these and related them for us so that we can see holistically. So if we, again, go back to the timeline, this started with a phishing URL, then an initial Trojan, then the port opening. So we see that the attack started at this 10.11.191, moved to this 10.11.190, and this was the pivot point. And now we're seeing PowerShell, we're seeing Mimikatz running as this test user. And you can see some of this data. This is real data, but it's been sanitized. We see a SQL dump, and then we finally see this volume shadow copy. The attack was stopped before the ransomware encrypted files because we were able to catch it. We should have caught it a little sooner, but at least we caught it here. But now we see this holistic attack. And this is not a static object. This would have continued to grow had the attack continued. As we were watching it, it could have continued to grow. But what do? Well, say we caught it here. Let's catch it here, and let's take an action. Let's stop it right here. Let's block it on a firewall. We're going to inject this IP address right here. We're going to say incoming and outgoing. We're going to block this thing forever. Or, you know what? Let's block it for 5 hours to give us time to investigate. And if it turns out to be nothing in 5 hours, Stellar will pull that IP address back and allow this system to communicate again. That's the amazing power of Stellar. But how does it all work? How do we get all the data in here? How does this all come together for us? Well, collection. Data collection is very, very important to Stellar. We are XDR, open XDR, anything detection and response. We want data from anywhere and everywhere. We want as much as we can get from everywhere that we can get it. So we have purpose-built sensors. Sensors have multiple purposes. Sensors can collect data off the wire. They can collect data being forwarded to them, logs being forwarded to them. They can collect data from the local system log, such as Windows event logs. And that's the point of a sensor. The sensor is a collection point. It's going to get data and push it to the platform. Whereas now we also have connectors. Connectors are a pull. We're going to pull data into the platform. O365, myriad of different areas. So here's an example of technologies that we support as far as pushing us data, right? All these standards and then all these vendor-specific data points that we're pulling in. And as Brian was talking about, we don't just pull it in, we put it through a pipeline, an enrichment pipeline, and we normalize it as well. Before we store it, before machine learning runs on top of it, and then before the GraphML runs on top of that. Then we also have connectors. The connectors pull the data and also enable our response capability. So if you look at all the connector types, you'll see we have many, many of them, and this list is constantly growing. We have many endpoint security vendors that we support, not just collection from, but response capabilities, being able to quarantine, being able to kill a process, being able to do anything that that endpoint system will allow us to do through an API call. We also have firewalls that we can inject IP addressing into block rules. We have Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, SaaS, vulnerability scanning, all these capabilities where we can pull data and respond. So very, very important. Collection is very important. Now, once we collect the data, we don't hide it from you. We don't just run the machine learning. We expose it all to you. We give you a full threat hunting workbench. You can get into all the raw data. Not only can you drill into it directly and write your own queries against it, and you can see all the raw data. You can also, we have a full-blown threat hunting library, pre-built queries. Windows PowerShell startups, for example, pre-built queries, pre-built windows into the raw data. These aren't the security alerts, but anywhere, any record within the platform, you also have your response capability. It's all there. Very, very powerful platform. I neglected to talk about our multi-tenancy, built from the ground up. It wasn't a bolt-on, it wasn't an add-on, it wasn't an afterthought. From the ground up, designed, baked in, is our partitioning. Very, very strict. Even our machine learning is strictly per tenant, per partition. Very powerful. I talked about our enrichment. We enrich geolocation. We enrich reputation on IP, URL, domain. We enrich host name, username. Anywhere we get data, we share that data with other forms of data. We also have network visibility. Amazing NTA capabilities, right? As far as network visibility. We also show flows and reputation, and we break it down public to private, private to public. We have asset analytics baked in, where we're gathering information on assets and users, EUBA, right? All this capability baked in for you. So this is a good point. Oh, and finally, everything I showed you that you can do manually as far as responding to a threat, you can do automatically. We call this automated threat hunting playbooks, or ATH playbooks. These playbooks, we have many and many of them predefined for you. They come out of the box for you to use. You can use them as a starting point. You can use them and edit them. You can use them as a tutorial. You can start from scratch. You don't need them. Here, command and control reputation anomaly, for example. I select it, it loads how often I want it to query the backend data, where I'm querying the data from, the query itself, what I'm looking for, the condition, how often do we want to see it? And you can have multiple conditions and multiple actions based on those conditions. And then look what I can do automatically. Fire an email, that's the simplest thing. Shoot off a Slack message or a webhook, or block on the firewall, or disable the user. And if nothing else works, I have a corner case proprietary system that we created in-house that will accept an API call. I can run an arbitrary script. And this script will accept any one of those data points as a parameter, more than one if you need to. Super powerful platform for automation as well. And we're here to help you with the whole thing. It's a fully comprehensive platform. There's no add-ons, there's no additional modules. It's everything you see is out of the box. So that pretty much concludes everything I'd like to show. If there's any questions, I can field those.
I'll jump in really quick, just a couple of my 2 cents here. So every time I see Scott do this, it's better and better, and I uncover more things it's capable of. So if you're an MSP, the way I look at this, and he showed us very extensively, is how many different vendors are you working with, and how many different professionals do you have managing disparate vendor systems that they have to manually correlate. This brings them all together, and that's the whole point, is to bring this together. It makes them more effective, which we know we have an effectiveness problem. There's lots of breaches out there, and I can name quite a few of them that have very expensive applications that have lots of different things that need to be addressed, and they don't have enough staffing to do it with it. By normalizing this and addressing it and setting policy to it, getting visually, into the entire environment, just not these individual, vendor platforms, you can do so much more with less. So I just wanted to, throw that in there, because that's really where I see this as a good fit. And the same thing for, end user clients. If this is a resell to an end user client, they can do the same thing. They can have a little smaller staff, get more visibility, less vendor management individually, and then bring it all into this system so they can manage more with less. So it works both directions here.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brian, because we have multiple partners. We support 17 of the top 250 MSSPs today, and that list is growing by the month. But they will tell you they can support 3 times as many customers with this platform as they could with an older, rules-based, SIM type technology, or they're a partner who, the old MDR services of the past, where they're just passing them through, really weren't enough, and they wanted to take their business to the next level. We provide a full jumpstart program of education, packaging, consulting, training on how to build your profitability, within your MSSP business. All that is included in the jumpstart package, and it gets you out of, having a partner that's maybe more black box, and you get a lot of alerts with no context. Here, you get a really full function platform that's easy to use, easy to maintain, easy to deploy and tune, that'll really delight your customers. And I think at the end of the day, ransomware is just one, piece to this whole puzzle. But when you have something as powerful as this platform, running your SOC, it'll become your superpower, really, and help you provide that superpower level of service to your customers. Well, I don't see any questions in the chat window. Brian, did you have any final thoughts, or Scott?
No, I think this was great. I think we covered all the bases. I always love this platform, and I see it every time. I'm just, awed by what its capabilities are. So, I think this has been great and hopefully educational to the audience.
Well, and we certainly appreciate you and Ingram Micro and all the support that you provide to us. So special thanks and a shout out to you guys for that. And Scott, as always, thank you so much for an amazing demo. And if you could just let me share our contact information real quick, Scott.
Does that work?
Yep, it did. So we've got all of our contact information here. If you have any questions or would like to learn more about Stellar Cyber, you've got all of your great contacts from Ingram Micro. David Vance, who unfortunately is out sick today, is there. I'm Brian Stoner. I'm the Vice President of our service provider group. And Scott Bianco was the one who did the demo for everyone today. So we really appreciate your time. We know your time's valuable, and we want to help you get more of it back to drive more value for your customers. So please reach out, and we'd be happy to engage with you and educate you on the platform and how you can make it part of your business. So thanks so much for your time today. And with that, I will say we'll see you next time. Thanks, Kelly.